If a complete stranger suddenly risked everything just to stop you from getting into your own car, would you listen?
Don't get in that car!
Everybody believed she had just destroyed her own life.
If someone with nothing to gain risks everything to stop you, maybe the real danger isn't the warning, it's ignoring it. Every morning at exactly 8:15, the front courtyard of the Han estate moved with quiet precision. Black luxury sedans lined the circular driveway, security officers checked every vehicle twice, and household staff disappeared from sight long before the Korean Mafia boss stepped outside. Everything followed the same routine because routines created control, and control kept powerful men alive. Ethan Kong believed that more than anyone. At just 36 years old, he had built a reputation across the city as a man who never hesitated, never second-guessed himself, and never allowed emotions to interfere with decisions. Dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, he descended the marble staircase with calm confidence, acknowledging his head of security with a slight nod before walking toward the waiting sedan. Around him, more than a dozen bodyguards maintained silent vigilance, their eyes constantly scanning every corner of the property. Inside the mansion, dozens of employees continued their work without daring to interrupt the carefully orchestrated departure. Among them was Naomi Carter, the estate's newest maid, a quiet black woman whose gentle manners and steady professionalism had earned little attention during the 3 months she had worked there. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, never lingered where she was not needed, and always seemed invisible to everyone except the elderly housekeeper who appreciated her kindness. Yet this morning something felt different. As Naomi carried a basket of freshly folded linens across the entrance hall, her eyes drifted through the open doors toward the driveway. The moment she saw Ethan reach for the rear passenger door of the black sedan, every color seemed to drain from her face. Her breathing became uneven. The basket slipped slightly in her trembling hands. For one long second, she stood completely frozen, staring at the vehicle as though she had seen something no one else could. Nearby employees exchanged puzzled glances, assuming she was simply overwhelmed by the presence of the estate's owner. But Naomi was not looking at Ethan. She was looking at the car itself. Then, before fear could convince her to stay silent, she dropped the basket onto the polished marble floor and ran. Crisp white towels scattered behind her as shocked staff members called out her name. Security guards instantly shifted positions, instinctively moving toward the unexpected disturbance, while Ethan turned slowly, his expression unreadable as the quiet maid rushed across the courtyard with surprising determination. She stopped only a few feet away, breathing hard, yet refusing to lower her eyes. Every guard instinctively reached toward concealed communication devices, waiting for a single command. The courtyard became so silent that even the fountain near the entrance seemed louder than before. Naomi swallowed once before speaking with a voice that trembled not from uncertainty, but from urgency. "Please, don't get in that car." No one moved. Several guards stared at her in disbelief. One senior bodyguard frowned, convinced the young maid had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Ethan studied her face without saying a word. She offered no explanation, no dramatic story, no desperate plea beyond the simple sentence hanging in the morning air. For the first time in years, someone had stepped directly into his carefully controlled routine, and strangely, despite every reason to dismiss her, something in Naomi's unwavering eyes made walking away feel far less certain than taking one more step toward the waiting car. No one dared to breathe until Ethan finally broke the silence. His dark eyes remained fixed on Naomi, searching her face for the slightest hint of hesitation, but he found none. Around them, the security team waited with disciplined patience, expecting him to dismiss the frightened maid and continue with the morning schedule. Instead, he spoke in the same calm voice that had settled countless high-pressure negotiations. "Give me one reason." The question echoed across the courtyard, simple yet impossible. Naomi opened her mouth, then stopped. She knew exactly how unbelievable the truth would sound. Every explanation that rushed through her mind ended with the same outcome. Nobody would believe her. "Please," she whispered again, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Just do not get into that car." A faint look of irritation crossed the face of Victor Hayes, the head of security. He stepped forward, careful to remain respectful toward his employer while addressing the young maid. "Miss Carter, you have crossed a line. Return inside immediately." Naomi did not move. Her hands trembled at her sides, but her feet remained firmly planted between Ethan and the waiting sedan. Victor exchanged a brief glance with two nearby guards, silently preparing to escort her away if necessary. Ethan noticed the movement and lifted one finger. The guards froze instantly. Nobody touched her. The unexpected gesture surprised everyone, including Naomi herself. Ethan rarely interrupted his own security protocols. He looked at her again, this time with genuine curiosity rather than annoyance. "You have 30 seconds, he said quietly. "Tell me why." Naomi lowered her eyes for only a moment before meeting his gaze once more. "I cannot explain it in a way that will make sense right now," she admitted honestly. "If I try, you will think I have lost my mind. All I can ask is that you trust me for 5 minutes." The request sounded almost absurd. Trust a maid he barely knew. Delay an important meeting because of a warning with no evidence. Victor shook his head. "Sir, this is exactly how confusion creates unnecessary risk. We have already inspected the vehicle twice this morning. Every procedure has been completed." Several other guards nodded in agreement. Their confidence came from years of experience and flawless routines. Ethan slowly turned toward the sedan. The polished black paint reflected the morning sunlight, revealing nothing unusual. Every window was spotless. Every tire appeared perfect. Nothing looked out of place. Yet when he glanced back at Naomi, he noticed something that unsettled him far more than her words. She was terrified, but not for herself. Her fear was entirely focused on him. People could fake panic. They could fake loyalty. But concern that ignored personal consequences was much harder to manufacture. Seconds passed. The estate staff watched from open windows, whispering quietly among themselves. Even the elderly housekeeper who had trained Naomi looked frightened, unable to understand what had compelled the normally reserved young woman to challenge the most powerful man in the household. Ethan checked the elegant silver watch on his wrist. Every instinct told him to continue with his plans. Every lesson his life had taught him warned against changing direction because of emotion. Still, something inside him resisted taking that final step toward the car. Without taking his eyes off Naomi, he calmly gave an order no one expected. "Delay my departure for 5 minutes." The courtyard fell into complete silence. Victor stared in disbelief. Several guards exchanged uncertain looks. Naomi quietly closed her eyes, not in relief, but as though she knew the next few moments would determine far more than anyone standing there could possibly imagine. The silence that followed Ethan's decision seemed to stretch far beyond 5 minutes. Nobody argued with his order, but confusion spread across the courtyard like an invisible wave. Victor immediately spoke into his communication device, instructing the drivers and security team to maintain their positions while another inspection was quietly organized. The guards moved with disciplined efficiency, although several exchanged doubtful glances. They had already completed every standard procedure before sunrise. To them, repeating the process felt unnecessary. Ethan remained exactly where he stood, his expression calm but thoughtful, while Naomi slowly opened her eyes again. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. Instead, she looked toward the sedan with the same uneasy focus that had driven her across the courtyard only moments earlier. One mechanic from the estate garage arrived carrying a diagnostic tablet and a compact inspection kit. He carefully examined each tire, opened the hood, checked the engine compartment, and verified the electronic systems. After several minutes, he looked up toward Victor and quietly shook his head. "Everything appears normal," he reported. Victor folded his arms, his confidence immediately returning. "That is exactly what I expected." Several guards relaxed slightly, convinced the unusual interruption had finally reached its predictable conclusion. Victor turned toward Naomi with restrained disappointment. "Miss Carter, whatever frightened you this morning, you should have reported it through the proper channels instead of creating unnecessary panic." Naomi listened without responding. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her, waiting for an explanation she still could not give. Ethan noticed that despite the mechanic's reassuring report, the fear had not disappeared from her face. If anything, it seemed to deepen. He found that strangely difficult to ignore. Before anyone could suggest ending the delay, another member of the security team approached from the far side of the driveway. "Sir, He called respectfully. There is one thing. Victor frowned. What is it? The guard held up a small electronic signal detector. We picked up an intermittent transmission near the vehicle. It disappeared before we could identify the source. Victor immediately dismissed the concern. Interference. There are dozens of wireless systems operating across the property every morning. The explanation sounded reasonable, yet Ethan noticed the younger guard hesitate before lowering the device. Perhaps, the guard replied carefully, but I have never seen this particular signal before. Ethan's attention shifted back to the sedan. Run a deeper inspection, he instructed calmly. This time the search became far more thorough. Interior panels were removed. Electronic compartments were opened. Every cable, connector, and communication module was carefully examined. Nearly 15 minutes passed before the lead technician suddenly stopped working. He leaned closer beneath the dashboard, his expression changing almost instantly. Sir, he said, his voice noticeably quieter than before. There is an aftermarket communication relay installed behind the control panel. Victor stepped forward, clearly surprised. That should not be there. The technician carefully disconnected the unfamiliar device without disturbing anything else and placed it inside a protective evidence bag. This component is not part of the manufacturer's system, he explained. It appears capable of transmitting location data to an external receiver. The courtyard became completely silent once again. No explosion had occurred. No dramatic confrontation unfolded. Yet the discovery alone was enough to transform the atmosphere. Someone had secretly placed unauthorized equipment inside the personal vehicle of one of the most protected men in the city without triggering any security alert. Ethan slowly looked toward Naomi. She had not moved. She had not spoken another word. She simply stood there with quiet relief, as though the danger she sensed had finally revealed just enough of itself to be believed. For the first time since she had arrived at the estate 3 months earlier, every person in the courtyard stopped seeing her as an invisible maid and started wondering what she knew that nobody else did. No one spoke for several long seconds after the communication relay was sealed inside the evidence bag. The quiet that settled over the courtyard felt heavier than any argument could have been. Victor accepted the bag from the technician and examined the unfamiliar device with growing disbelief. He had supervised Ethan's security for nearly 12 years, and nothing like this had ever slipped through his carefully designed protocols. His confidence remained, but for the first time that morning it was accompanied by uncertainty. Ethan calmly adjusted the cuff of his jacket before turning toward Victor. I want every vehicle grounded until every system is inspected again, he said. No exceptions. Victor nodded immediately, already issuing new instructions through his communication device. Guards dispersed across the estate. Mechanics opened garage bays, and drivers began moving every vehicle into separate inspection areas. The entire morning schedule quietly dissolved. Meetings were postponed. Routes were canceled. Trusted routines no longer felt trustworthy. Ethan finally shifted his attention back to Naomi. She still stood where she had first stopped him, almost as if she had forgotten that dozens of people continued watching her. The fear in her expression had softened, replaced by visible exhaustion. Walk with me, Ethan said simply. The request surprised everyone. Victor instinctively stepped closer. Sir, perhaps we should question her here. Ethan shook his head once. No. His answer was calm, but final. Naomi hesitated before following him through the grand entrance of the mansion. Neither of them spoke as they crossed the marble foyer and entered a quiet library overlooking the eastern gardens. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, filling the room with warm light that contrasted sharply with the tension outside. Ethan motioned toward a leather chair. Please sit. Naomi remained standing for another moment before carefully taking the offered seat. Ethan sat across from her, leaving several feet of respectful distance between them. He folded his hands together and studied her face with quiet patience. 3 months, he said. You have worked here for 3 months without drawing attention to yourself. Every supervisor describes you the same way. Reliable, quiet, honest. Naomi lowered her eyes. I only came here to work. Ethan nodded slowly. Then help me understand something. This morning you were willing to risk your job, your reputation, and possibly much more to stop me from leaving. Why? Naomi searched for an answer that would sound believable, but every explanation felt impossible. She could not tell him that a terrible feeling had overwhelmed her the instant she saw the sedan. She could not explain why the shape of that parked car had awakened memories she had spent years trying to bury. Instead, she answered with complete honesty. Because if I stayed silent and something happened to you, I would never forgive myself. Ethan noticed that she had still not claimed to know what the hidden device was. She had never said someone planted it. She had never accused anyone inside the estate. Her warning had come without accusations, demands, or attempts to gain favor. That troubled him more than any dramatic story could have. Before either of them could continue, Victor entered the library after receiving permission to knock. His normally composed face carried an unfamiliar seriousness. "Sir," he said quietly, "we reviewed yesterday's security recordings. There is something you need to see." Ethan stood immediately. Victor placed a tablet on the desk and started the recording. The camera overlooked the private garage entrance during the previous evening. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Staff members came and went according to schedule. Drivers completed routine maintenance. Then, at exactly 9:42 that night, the video briefly distorted with static for less than 4 seconds. When the picture returned, one vehicle had changed position by only a few inches. It was almost impossible to notice unless someone knew exactly where to look. Ethan stared silently at the screen. The distortion itself was disturbing, but what unsettled him most was realizing that while everyone had been searching for a person, the only clue they had found so far was a missing 4 seconds that no one could explain. The missing 4 seconds became the only topic anyone inside the Han estate could think about. Security specialists replayed the footage repeatedly, slowing it down frame by frame, enhancing every shadow and reflection, yet the result never changed. The picture dissolved into static, then returned as though nothing unusual had happened, except for the barely noticeable shift in the sedan's position. Victor immediately ordered every surveillance system across the property to be examined for signs of interference, but the technicians found no failures, no damaged cables, and no evidence that anyone had accessed the recording equipment from inside the network. It was as though those 4 seconds had simply vanished. Ethan remained standing beside the large monitor, quietly absorbing every detail without rushing to conclusions. He had survived long enough to understand that unanswered questions were often more dangerous than obvious threats. Across the room, Naomi waited silently, uncertain whether she should leave or remain. She had already said everything she could truthfully explain, yet she sensed the morning was far from over. Ethan finally turned toward her. "Last night," he asked calmly, "did you notice anyone near the garage?" Naomi searched her memory carefully. "No, sir," she answered. "I finished cleaning the west hallway around 9 o'clock, then returned to the staff quarters. I did not go outside again." Ethan watched her closely. Her answer came naturally, without hesitation or unnecessary detail. Victor, however, remained unconvinced. "Sir, with respect, she still has not explained how she knew something was wrong." Ethan nodded slightly. "I know." The room fell quiet again until Naomi spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "May I tell you something that will probably sound unreasonable?" Ethan gave a single nod. Naomi took a slow breath. "When I was 16, my family was involved in a terrible highway accident during a severe thunderstorm. Before we left that evening, I begged my mother to stay home because I felt something was wrong. I could not explain why. Everyone believed I was simply anxious. Since that day, there have been only a handful of moments when that same feeling has returned. Every time it did, something unexpected happened soon afterward." She lowered her eyes, almost embarrassed by her own words. "I know that is not evidence. I know it does not make logical sense. That is why I never wanted to say it." Nobody laughed. Nobody interrupted. Ethan noticed that Naomi was not asking anyone to believe in mysterious abilities. She was describing painful memories she herself did not fully understand. Victor folded his arms, still relying on facts rather than feelings, but even he could not ignore the timing of her warning. Before anyone could respond, another technician hurried into the library carrying a folder of maintenance records. "Sir," he said, placing several documents on the desk, "we found something unusual." Ethan opened the file. Every vehicle inspection completed during the previous 6 months had been signed by the same senior maintenance supervisor, except for yesterday's inspection of the black sedan. That report carried a different signature belonging to a temporary contractor who had worked at the estate for only 3 days before unexpectedly resigning early that morning. Victor's expression hardened immediately. "Find him," he ordered without hesitation. One of the investigators quickly searched employment records, then looked up with visible concern. "Sir, the identification documents he provided appear to be authentic, but the listed address belongs to an empty building scheduled for demolition almost 2 years ago." Ethan slowly closed the folder. The hidden relay, the missing 4 seconds, and now a contractor who seemed to have disappeared without leaving behind a real identity were no longer isolated mysteries. They were pieces of the same puzzle. As he looked toward Naomi once more, he realized the quiet Maid had not created chaos inside his carefully controlled world. She had simply been the first person to notice that someone else already had. The atmosphere inside the Han estate changed before noon, although nobody announced it aloud. Guards who normally walked with effortless confidence now watched every hallway twice. Maintenance teams verified identification badges before allowing anyone near restricted areas. Even longtime employees sensed that trust had quietly become more valuable than routine. Ethan canceled every meeting scheduled outside the estate for the remainder of the day, a decision that surprised business partners who had never known him to postpone an appointment without extraordinary reason. He offered no explanation. Very few people were entitled to one. Inside the library, Victor continued coordinating the investigation while specialists searched for any trace of the temporary contractor who had vanished after completing the previous day's vehicle inspection. Every database returned the same frustrating result. The man's documents appeared genuine, yet every trail ended at information that no longer existed. It was as though someone had carefully created an identity designed to disappear the moment it was no longer needed. Ethan listened to each update without interruption. His attention, however, repeatedly returned to Naomi, who remained quietly seated near the window, looking more concerned about the unanswered questions than about the unexpected attention now focused on her. Finally, Ethan closed the investigation folder and stood. "Miss Carter," he said calmly, "have you eaten breakfast?" The question caught her completely off guard. She blinked in surprise before softly answering, "No, sir." Ethan nodded once. "Neither have I." Victor looked up, confused by the sudden change in conversation. Ethan continued as though it were the most natural decision in the world. "Join me." Naomi immediately shook her head. "I cannot do that. I am only a member of the household staff." Ethan's expression remained composed. "Today you are the reason I am still here instead of following a compromised schedule. I did not ask for your position. I asked whether you would share a meal." The room became perfectly still. Several staff members standing outside the open library doors exchanged astonished glances. No maid had ever been invited to breakfast with the head of the estate. Naomi hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "If it makes everyone uneasy," she said carefully, "I would rather return to work." Ethan offered the faintest smile. "Everyone will adjust." A few minutes later, they sat at opposite ends of a long dining table overlooking the gardens. The meal itself was simple: fresh fruit, eggs, toast, tea, and coffee. Ethan noticed that Naomi barely touched her plate. She remained respectful, careful not to speak unless addressed directly. After several quiet minutes, he asked, "Why did you apply to work here?" Naomi looked toward the gardens before answering. "Because this was the only place that offered steady work without asking questions about my past." Ethan did not press further. Instead, he quietly poured another cup of tea and changed the subject, asking where she had grown up, what books she enjoyed, and whether she missed her family. The conversation felt surprisingly ordinary after such an extraordinary morning. Watching from a distance, Victor found himself studying the exchange with growing curiosity. Ethan was famous for reading people better than contracts. He rarely trusted first impressions, yet he almost never ignored his instincts once they formed. The security investigation continued throughout the estate, but another realization slowly emerged alongside it. For the first time since Naomi had arrived 3 months earlier, Ethan was no longer trying to determine whether she had become part of the mystery. He was beginning to wonder whether she might be the only person quietly leading him toward the truth. By late afternoon, the Han estate appeared calm again, but everyone living inside understood that appearances could no longer be trusted. Security checkpoints had doubled, every employee badge had been reissued, and even senior staff members submitted to additional verification without complaint. Ethan quietly reviewed reports inside his private office, while Victor coordinated interviews with every contractor who had entered the property during the previous month. Hour after hour, the investigation produced fragments of information but no clear answers. The temporary contractor had vanished completely. The communication relay had been professionally assembled from commercially available components that could not be traced to a single supplier. The missing 4 seconds of surveillance footage remained impossible to recover. Every discovery answered one question only to create another. As evening approached, Ethan walked alone through the estate gardens, something he rarely allowed himself time to do. The carefully trimmed hedges, stone pathways, and quiet reflecting pond usually brought a sense of order after demanding days. Today they only reminded him how easily order could become an illusion. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "Sir." Naomi stood several yards away holding a small basket filled with freshly cut flowers gathered for the dining room. She immediately lowered her eyes. "I am sorry. I did not realize anyone was here." Ethan shook his head. "You are not interrupting anything." For a moment neither of them spoke. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine across the garden, while the fading sunlight painted long shadows beneath the old maple trees. Ethan noticed Naomi glancing toward the stone wall bordering the eastern edge of the property. Her expression changed almost too quickly to notice. Curious, he quietly followed her line of sight. Nothing appeared unusual except for a maintenance gate standing slightly open. It was normally kept locked. Ethan pressed a small communication button hidden beneath his jacket sleeve. "Victor," he said calmly, "send 2 men to the east garden entrance." Quietly, he did not explain further. Naomi looked surprised. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked softly. Ethan answered without taking his eyes off the gate. "No. You noticed something before I did." Within less than a minute, 2 security officers reached the maintenance entrance. They examined the lock, then looked back toward Ethan. "Sir," one called out, "the lock has fresh tool marks. It was opened recently." Victor arrived moments later, immediately inspecting the damaged latch. "No scheduled maintenance has been authorized for this area today," he said. Ethan slowly walked toward the gate. Beyond it stretched a narrow service road hidden behind rows of tall trees. Tire tracks were visible in the soft gravel, still fresh enough to suggest recent activity. Victor ordered another search team into the surrounding grounds while technicians photographed every detail. Naomi remained several steps behind, saying nothing. She did not appear surprised by the discovery. She simply looked saddened, as though another piece of a puzzle had fallen into place exactly where she feared it would. Ethan turned toward her. "You looked at this gate before anyone else," he observed. Naomi hesitated before answering. "When I was gathering flowers, I thought I saw someone standing there for just a second. By the time I looked again, they were gone. I convinced myself I had imagined it." Ethan studied her expression carefully. She was not asking him to believe impossible stories. She was describing small details she almost chose to ignore. He realized that while everyone else had been searching for dramatic evidence, Naomi kept noticing ordinary things that quietly refused to fit where they belonged. As the search teams disappeared beyond the open gate, Ethan understood something that unsettled him more than the hidden relay or the missing surveillance footage. Whoever had entered the estate once had likely been watching far longer than anyone had ever suspected, and if that unseen observer was still nearby, then the greatest threat had never been outside the walls at all. It had been patiently learning every routine from the shadows. Darkness settled gently over the Han estate, but nobody treated the evening like an ordinary night. Additional security lights illuminated every pathway, patrol teams rotated more frequently than usual, and the operations room remained active long after sunset. Yet despite every new precaution, Ethan could not shake the feeling that they were reacting to someone who always seemed one step ahead. The search beyond the eastern maintenance gate produced fresh tire impressions, scattered footprints that faded into the nearby woods, and traces of disturbed branches, but nothing that revealed who had entered the property or why. Whoever had been there understood exactly how to leave almost nothing behind. Inside the mansion, Victor gathered senior security personnel around a digital map of the estate, assigning overlapping patrol routes and reviewing every camera angle. Ethan listened quietly before making one unexpected decision. From this moment forward, he said, Naomi is not to work alone anywhere on the property. Several guards exchanged puzzled glances. Victor looked surprised. Sir, are you concerned someone may target her? Ethan answered without hesitation. If someone invested this much effort into learning my routine, they also know she interrupted it. That makes her important whether she understands why or not. Naomi immediately shook her head. Please do not change everyone's schedule because of me. Ethan looked at her calmly. This is not because of you. It is because someone else may believe you have become a problem. His words left the room silent. Naomi had spent most of her life trying not to attract attention. Now she found herself protected by the very people who had barely noticed her a day earlier. Later that evening, the elderly housekeeper asked Naomi to help organize several storage rooms in the oldest wing of the mansion. 2 guards accompanied her at a respectful distance, following Ethan's instructions precisely. As Naomi carefully arranged boxes of old records and folded linens onto wooden shelves, she noticed something unusual near. A narrow service window that overlooked the rear gardens. The thin layer of dust covering the windowsill had been disturbed. A single clean line crossed the surface as though someone had recently rested a hand there while looking inside. She quietly called one of the guards over. Has this room been cleaned today? She asked. He glanced around and shook his head. Not for almost a week. Naomi pointed toward the windowsill without touching it. The guard immediately contacted Victor, who arrived within minutes carrying a flashlight and evidence gloves. He examined the mark carefully before opening the window. The latch had not been forced, but it had not fully locked either. Just outside, hidden beneath climbing ivy, technicians discovered a tiny battery-powered camera no larger than a shirt button, positioned to observe the hallway leading toward Ethan's private office. Victor removed the device with visible frustration. Someone has been watching the inside of this house, he said quietly. Ethan arrived moments later and looked from the hidden camera to Naomi. He realized this was now the 3rd time she had quietly noticed something everyone else had overlooked. There had been no dramatic confrontation, no impossible coincidence, only careful observation and the courage to speak when something felt wrong. Ethan slowly turned toward Victor. Tomorrow morning, he said, we stop waiting for whoever is hiding in the shadows to make the next move. We change every routine, every schedule, every expectation. Victor nodded immediately. Naomi looked toward the dark garden beyond the open window, sensing that the invisible presence surrounding the estate had not disappeared. It had only been forced to realize that for the first time since its plan began, someone inside the mansion was paying attention to the smallest details, and sometimes the smallest detail was enough to change everything. The following morning, the Han estate woke to a routine that no longer resembled the one everyone had memorized for years. Every departure route had been rewritten. Every vehicle assignment had changed. Security teams rotated without predictable patterns, and even Ethan's schedule existed only inside Victor's handwritten notebook instead of the estate's digital calendar. Whoever had been quietly studying the mansion would now be forced to begin again. Shortly after sunrise, investigators returned with the first meaningful breakthrough. The hidden communication relay recovered from Ethan's sedan contained fragments of encrypted transmission logs. Although the messages themselves could not be restored, the timestamps matched the exact moments when surveillance footage had disappeared. Someone had not simply planted a tracking device. They had carefully synchronized multiple systems to create small windows of invisibility without drawing attention. Ethan listened to the report in complete silence before asking only one question. Did we stop it in time? Victor answered honestly. We may never know what the original plan was, but whatever it depended on, your decision to delay your departure changed it. Ethan slowly looked toward the library window where morning light spilled across the gardens. A single choice had interrupted a chain of events nobody fully understood. Hours later, after the investigation teams departed to continue their work, the mansion finally grew quiet for the first time in 2 days. Naomi prepared to return to her normal duties, believing the extraordinary attention surrounding her would finally disappear. As she crossed the entrance hall carrying fresh flowers toward the dining room, Ethan met her near the grand staircase. There were no guards crowding around him, no urgent meetings waiting, only a rare moment of calm. Naomi lowered her eyes respectfully. Good morning, sir. Ethan shook his head gently. Yesterday you called me by my title because you believed you had no choice. Today I would like you to know something. She looked up, surprised by the warmth in his voice. You are no longer invisible in this house. Naomi smiled faintly, uncertain how to respond. I never wanted to stand out. Ethan understood. Neither did the people who quietly changed someone else's life. He paused before continuing. I have spent years believing that strength came from controlling every detail around me. Yesterday, a quiet woman with no authority, no influence, and no obligation to protect me proved that real strength sometimes begins with the courage to speak when everyone else remains silent. Naomi felt tears gathering, but quickly blinked them away. I only did what I hoped someone would have done for my family. Ethan nodded slowly, finally understanding that her warning had never been about loyalty to power. It had come from compassion shaped by painful experience. He extended his hand, not as an employer rewarding an employee, but as one person expressing genuine respect to another. After a brief hesitation, Naomi accepted the handshake. It lasted only a moment, yet every member of the household who quietly witnessed it understood that something far greater than an investigation had ended. Trust had begun. As Ethan prepared to leave for his rescheduled meeting, he walked toward a different vehicle parked beneath the morning sun. Before opening the door, he glanced back toward Naomi. Thank you, Naomi. It was the first time he had spoken her name instead of her position. She answered with a quiet smile, watching the car disappear through the front gates without fear for the first time since arriving at the estate. The mystery surrounding the hidden observer would continue, and many questions still waited to be answered, but one truth had already become impossible to ignore. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the very one who sees what no one else is willing to notice. And sometimes a single warning offered with nothing to gain becomes the reason another person is given the chance to keep writing the rest of their story.